Before we turn to talk about some of the solutions that economists and others offer to the problem of climate change, one issue that often comes up in conversations in Australia is that we're a pretty small part of the world economy, and although we're a significant exporter of fossil fuels, nonetheless, what we do doesn't seem to count for very much in the grand scheme of things. So you often find people in Australia saying, even if they acknowledge the science of climate change, that if the big emitters in the United States and China and perhaps increasingly India aren't prepared to do anything, why should Australia take up measures that might have some short-term cost to us, even if they produce longer-term benefits? Why does what we do matter?
Yeah, and it is a very valid and good question. So the Paris Agreement talks about common but differentiated goals. So if we think about the historic contribution to climate change, developed economies like Australia have contributed far more than the emerging developing economies such as India. Obviously, China's now grown so rapidly in recent years that it's pretty well caught up, but it is also progressing massively and investing massively in the green economy. India is a really interesting question, and I'm doing quite a bit of work in that particular region at the moment. It's a very difficult challenge. When you look at so much of India, there are, more than billion households that have very limited access to energy. They might have a single LPG heater in the kitchen or cooker in the kitchen, one light bulb. We're asking people who are trying to bring their living standards up to say, well, sorry, we blew your carbon budget, so now it's up to, but too bad, it's up to you because you've got this massive population. And even though your per capita emissions are really low, it's too bad. That common and differentiated goals for Australia means we have to do more than, what might some consider, reasonable. We have to do as much as we possibly can. And that opens up for us opportunities to help others come along the journey with us, which of course is in our own interests. We're an extremely climate vulnerable continent, and we're not immune or shielded to what happens in the rest of the world, as we're seeing at the moment with the tariffs around the world. What happens in other countries comes back to bite us all. And so it's in our interest to be a beacon because we can be, we're wealthy, we have incredible resources. So, we can help others to be on that journey as well. Yes, we can't solve the climate crisis on our own, but we can certainly, in terms of our resources, make sure that we at least pull our weight and then some.
Okay, so you've made an argument as to why Australia needs to play its part, however small it might be, in reducing our own emissions as a contribution to reducing global emissions, and also that as a richer country, we're under obligations to do more. And we've, of course, signed up to that under the Paris Agreement. But let's come back to the economics of it and ask, so what should we actually be doing to achieve what we've committed to under the Paris Agreement and what we're morally and ethically obliged to do?
So the most recent government, of course, has committed us to a 43% reduction in emissions by 2030. And net zero by 2050, which net zero by 2050 is what needs to be done around the world. And so it is concerning that larger economies like India and China are not yet able to deliver that. But just coming back to Australia, obviously a lot of the focus is on the energy sector because that's where most of our emissions come from. And along with the climate challenge and urgency, there is also, of course, the need for energy stability and reliability. We've got all these coal-fired power stations that are aging out of the grid. They will all be gone within around about a decade. And so we need to be investing more anyway. So renewables, the cheapest option, even renewables with firming, the CSIRO calculations show us that is the cheapest way. It's not necessarily going to mean that your power bills are less. It just means than they are today. But it means if you put in the cheaper investment in renewables now, your bills at least won't go up by as much as they would have. And I think that's a difficult message for a lot of people to sell out there. But it is the best way, the cheapest and most reliable way forward for us. But there are other things that we're doing. Obviously, the government's investing a lot in the capacity investment scheme to get more of that investment in renewables, whether it's in storage, battery storage, or in wind and solar. They're also doing things at household level, so lots of rollouts of solar rebates. We're seeing things as simple as changing building codes to make sure that we actually build the most energy efficient buildings that really limit their use of fossil fuels. But that's very hard. There's always a lot of pushback in these areas. Obviously, transport, we've seen this year the National Vehicle Efficiency Standards brought in. That's a really important one. Over time, Australia was, until we had this in January this year, had the lowest standards in the world, on a par with Russia. And that's not something you ever want to be. So we're doing lots of different things. Unfortunately, it's very hard to map out what's being done across federal government, across state government, even at local government levels. And there's not a lot of consistency, and nor is there a lot of transparency about what is the cost that we're paying for all of these policies. Some of them sound great, but some of them have a very high price tag per carbon unit abated, much more so than others.